Okay. I'll remind everybody the meeting is being recorded. And as we have done with the other technical conferences, the recording and the slides will be available. Jalila, when do you think that information might be up for people to look at?
I think we should be able to get it posted by Monday or Tuesday at the latest.
Okay. All right, great. So for those who want to follow up, that information will be posted. We pulled together this tech conference on, the interaction of bulk system planning with local transmission planning at the request of some members of our steering committee. So I'm not going to dwell too much longer. I know it's a topic of a lot of interest. The utilities were able to pull together this presentation and give people a sense of where they are in terms of designing their proposal to integrate with bulk system planning. So unless anybody has any preliminary questions, I think we'll get started. What I would propose to do is while Jeff is presenting, if you have questions, please capture them in the chat as we go along. But I expect we will also have time for live questions when Jeff is done. So that said, Jeff, if you're ready to go, that would be great.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Marr. I work for National Grid in our transmission planning group, and I'm here today presenting on behalf of the utilities and really the entire team that's been working to create the coordinated grid planning process, the CGPP. So let's get right into it. Today we're going to kind of level set people. If you've been to one of the past tech conferences, the first few slides will look very similar. Where we're going to just touch on the objective of CGPP, the timeline, and then really what we're going to do today here is talk about how bulk system planning fits into CGPP. And really that's going to dovetail with CGPP in stage 1 and stage 5. So after the overview, we'll give a little bit of more detail about how stage 1 and stage 5 would unfold in CGPP. And then we'll have, I think, plenty of time for questions. So really here today, what we want to do is gather feedback. We've gotten a lot of good discussion and good feedback from the entire series of technical conferences that we've had. It's a great opportunity to hear the input and feedback from all of our stakeholders. The utilities plans remain in development, right? We're still working on CGPP. You can see here at the bottom of the slide, we are targeting January 1, 2023 to submit the filing. But we're still kind of sprinting to that finish. The slides presented today represent our current thinking, our current plans, and they are not final, right? We are still looking for this feedback and this discussion today prior to finalizing our plan. As I mentioned, today's discussion will focus, though, on how the bulk system planning is considered in CGPP. If you don't have an opportunity to provide comments today, the comment period is open through March 3rd. Well, at least so far, it's open through March 3rd per the notice that extended the comment period. So what is CGPP? The goal of the coordinated grid planning process is to identify the expansion of the local transmission and distribution system and the bulk transmission system that can help unlock the renewable capacity and energy for the purpose of meeting the New York State clean energy goals. Right. So this is a new process that we're creating. And again, that's the goal, is to identify where it makes sense to invest in our transmission, our local transmission, our distribution, and our bulk transmission system to help meet the state's goals. It will serve as the basis for the least cost statewide integrated resource planning process, if people are familiar with that term. And again, it's really the idea here is to look at how transmission and generation all work together to meet the state's goals. So CGPP is really broken into these 5 pieces here on the left-hand or right-hand side of the screen. So to kind of speak to the end-to-end kind of overview of what the process will look like, we're going to start with capacity expansion modeling. Right, so anybody who is familiar with what the NISO has been doing in their system and resource outlook, this will look very similar. But the goal of the capacity expansion model is to kind of get an idea of what 2030 or 2035 or 2040 will look like. How much generation will we have? Where will the generation be? You know, what zones within New York will have this new generation? So the capacity expansion model is a way to help us understand what the multitude of pathways forward might look like, and try to pick from the various possible scenarios, ones that we think are more likely. Once we have picked the scenarios that we think are more likely for what, you know, again, 2030, 2035, 2040 might look like, what we're going to do with those is create a bunch of databases. So really what we mean here is by databases is power flow models and auxiliary files, the things that we need to really dig in the next stage, local assessment, you know, all the things that we need to perform a local assessment of the transmission networks across New York State and understand where the barriers are to delivering these renewable resources. Once we've completed that local assessment and understand what the barriers are to delivering these renewables, we move into developing solutions and then reviewing those solutions, looking at the state from a coordinated perspective across all of the utilities, across all of the transmission, distribution, and even the bulk system, to make sure that these solutions fit together as part of a cohesive plan. And then at the last step, what we're going to do is take those solutions and go back to that capacity expansion model that we started with and understand the value of those projects, understand the value of those solutions and how they fit in with this idea of doing least cost planning. You know, it's not always a given that transmission is the way to go. Sometimes it's a better option to move generation around across the state to areas that maybe we didn't initially assume that the generation would be, but now that we understand the limitations of the transmission system, maybe it makes sense to incentivize generation to go somewhere else in the state in order to reduce the transmission cost, right? That's a potential outcome of least cost planning. So that's what we're doing with the capacity expansion model in the last step, is looking at how generation and transmission and local distribution all fit together as part of a complete plan for the state. So here today, what I mentioned at the beginning is we're going to talk really about how bulk system fits into the first stage, the capacity expansion model work, and then kind of the last stage, and then the last stage, the least cost planning assessment. So how do we use bulk? How do we understand bulk needs in the first and last stages is what we'll talk through today. To give you a sense of the timeline here, this is one area especially that's still under development. We're still trying to make sure we understand how this end-to-end process will play out in terms of time. The concept right now is that it'll be a 2-year process. And in year 1, we would do all of that data collection, the capacity expansion modeling, development of base cases, and then starting that third stage where we develop projects or understand our system limitations and start developing those preferred solutions that would kind of stretch from the end of year 1 into year 2. With year 2 continuing that stage 4 review of the solutions. The stage 5 then would be the least cost planning assessment, which would close out the back half of year 2. That's how we envision right now this entire timeline playing out over this 2-year horizon. So how does bulk fit in? What are we going to do for bulk? The concept right now that the utilities are developing is that in stage 1, what we will do with our capacity expansion models is run sensitivities. And these sensitivities would look at the impact of increasing the bulk system capability. So what happens when we increase, and we'll talk about this a little more on the next slide, is the pipes, the big pipes, the bulk system, how the bulk system is interconnected between the zones. What happens when we increase the capability of those connections between all of the NICA zones, or one zone, or multiple combinations of zones? Like, where would it make sense to increase those capabilities? That's what we'll do in stage 1. If increasing the bulk system capability is found to have a materially beneficial impact on achieving the CLCPA mandates, a recommendation would be made to the Public Service Commission that a public policy transmission need be initiated. Now, the Public Service Commission could also look at a priority transmission project, a NIPA PTP, and we're kind of generically using the PPTN concept throughout this deck, but it could be a PPTN or a PTP. That would be their decision. The recommendation to the commission would then proceed separately and outside of CGPP, right? So if the commission decides to initiate a PPTN, that would happen per all of the established process that exists today in New York State. That would not be handled by the utilities. It would not be handled by CGPP. That would happen essentially, like, for example, a PPTN would be something that would follow the NISO's process. In stage 5, that's where the two processes come back together, right? So in stage 5, the bulk project would be folded into the least cost planning assessment to understand what the combination of the generation, local transmission, and bulk system projects result in the most cost-efficient achievement of the CLCPA mandates. Right, so that's how this is going to play out, we think. Is at stage 1, we identify potential bulk needs, and in stage 5, those needs come back into CGPP to understand the least cost planning assessment. Now, again, this is an overview. We're going to talk on the next 2 slides a little bit more about what's going to happen in stage 1 and stage 5. So stage 1, I mentioned the capacity expansion model. The capacity expansion models give us an opportunity to play what ifs. They give us an opportunity to see if sensitivities that examine increasing the bulk system capability might provide value. So to understand this a little bit better, the model is a simplified representation of New York. Think of it as 11 bubbles, each bubble representing a NICA zone, and then pipes connecting those zones representing the transmission networks. So we've got these pipes and bubbles. So what we can do with this model is see the effects of increasing the size of the pipes. What happens when we add more transmission capability? How does the generation build out change across those 11 bubbles? Now, increasing the size of the pipes could reduce the number of resources required to achieve the goals. It could change the type of resources or allow additional generation to be located in more cost-effective areas. Or it could have really no impact at all. But this is what we will do with these sensitivities, is try to understand which ones or which interfaces are bottling renewables, which interfaces could be relaxed and provide benefits. And again, those benefits are really about lowering the cost of this generation build out. The results of these sensitivities will be presented to EPAC. So EPAC was the subject of previous technical conferences. So I think those are all out there posted. But very quickly, EPAC is kind of the guiding group for CGPP. It's a stakeholder forum where some of these issues can be discussed. And one of the main functions for EPAC will be helping us select the scenarios that would proceed through CGPP. Right, there are a finite amount of resources and a finite amount of time So we can't look at everything through CGPP. We have to boil down all of these possibilities into a limited number of scenarios or sensitivities, a very limited number that we would then proceed to really, again, analyze and understand the limitations on renewables, the capabilities of our local transmission and distribution systems, even the bulk systems. So EPAC is going to help us understand pick which scenarios will proceed through CGPP. So as we work with EPAC, if the determination is that relaxing a bulk limit is considered to be material, it seems to provide a significant amount of value, the recommendation would be made to the Public Service Commission that a public policy transmission need be identified. In some cases, the commission could elect to proceed with a priority transmission project, but again, we're kind of generically thinking of this as a PPTN. Only the Public Service Commission can initiate a PPTN. All right, so the utilities are, or more generically, EPAC, DPS, utilities, however you want to think of it, this group would just be making a recommendation for the Public Service Commission to consider initiating a PPTN. The process to identify the need for bulk system improvements, or this process, does not replace the existing process that's in place. So some stakeholders may be aware that just recently, the NISO submitted comments that they collected from stakeholders. And you can see on the screen, here's the case number. So this new effort in CGPP to identify beneficial bulk projects does not replace any of the work that the NISO does today to solicit comments or collect comments from stakeholders. This is just a new, or another opportunity for potential bulk, beneficial bulk upgrades to be identified. And again, once PPTN or PTP is identified, it would proceed outside of CGPP. The utilities will not be doing a public policy transmission need or a public policy or a transmission project solicitation. That is not what the utilities are doing. The utilities are recommending to the commission that they initiate a PPTN, and that PPTN will be administered by the NISO as they do today. Now, the goal would be for the NISO to complete that process to the point of identifying viable and sufficient projects. So that's a very specific milestone within the NISO's process. So their process, very high level, very generically, they solicit for specific projects from developers. They establish the targets. Developers provide those potential projects to the NISO. And then the NISO does an initial evaluation that they call their viability and sufficiency review. And that's just to confirm that the projects do meet those minimum criteria that was established by the Public Service Commission. So that's the first kind of major step for the NISO process, as kind of I think of it, is that they identify these projects are viable and sufficient. So the goal would be the NISO completes that viability and sufficiency review, and the information out of that viability and sufficiency review will come back to CGPP in stage 5, which is the next slide here we'll talk through. So stage 5 of CGPP is the least cost planning assessment. In stage 5, we're going to again rely on the capacity expansion models. And the intent here is to rerun those models respecting headroom limitations on generation that can connect in each zone, within each bubble. So this is kind of a new addition that we didn't do in stage 1. So what we're doing in stage 5 is we're kind of refining our model. We're refining the model to understand what the headroom limits are. The model will then be able to add energy and capacity headroom, but at a cost equal to the local projects that must be completed to add that headroom. So these first 2 bullets, again, are from a previous tech conference, essentially. we talked at the previous tech conference about how least cost planning would work. And these first two bullets is basically lifted right from that discussion. The new piece here is the third bullet. So if a PPTN was identified, we will also be able to give that PPTN to the model. So the model will be able to increase the size of those pipes, able to increase the size of the pipes at a cost equal to the cost of the identified project. Right, so this is kind of the new piece here again that we're adding into CGPP. And the goal is for the model to provide an indication of what combination of local or of generation, local transmission and distribution projects, and now bulk system projects result in the coordinated planning approach required to achieve the CLCPA mandates. Now, the results of the least cost planning assessment would be given to the Public Service Commission for them to determine if the PPTN process should continue to selection and award. So this is just, again, it's a piece of information that the commission can use to make a decision. We can show, again, how that bulk project fit in with all of the other proposed work. There's a lot of possibilities for what they can do with this information, and that would be up to them to determine. Again, the utilities are not making a decision here within CGPP. We are only taking the available information on our local projects, our bulk projects, and running the capacity expansion model to understand how they may fit together to help inform decision makers for what the best path forward would be. Now, I realize that was a lot of talking and I covered quite a bit of material. So at this point, I think it's best to just open the floor to questions and see if people have anything they'd like to raise.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Jeff. Yep, I don't see any written questions in the chat. So why don't we, as you say, open the floor? That was quite a lot of material and some kind of difficult stuff to get our heads around, but
Hi, Liz, it's Kevin Lane. Could I ask a question?
yes, please.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Just trying to understand on the timing issue. At the end of stage one, you would go to the commission and identify a potential PPTN. And then in stage 5, you would assume, I think, that there is a PPTN. Do I have that right?
Well, if the commission initiated PPTN, so the timeline, because it is a sticky point on the timeline. So to go back here, we're kind of here in year 1, kind of like in Q2, and then we're coming back into this stage 5 in year 2, kind of like Q3. So we've got about a year here where we would assume that the commission made a decision about whether or not to proceed with a PPTN, and that the NISO would, if directed, initiate that PPTN process.
Okay, that's what, thank you, because that was going to be one of my 2 questions. The other one is just, in fact, I think it's probably still going on right this second. There is a discussion going on in the Electric System Planning Working Group at the NISO that in part is talking about this overlap and particularly the Long Island PPTN project. And one of the observations they made with particularly the Long Island PPTN project is that the proposals that have been submitted are very, very different. And when you say in stage 5, you're going to assume this expansion, if you have a PPTN that could yield very, very different types of projects, how do you assume what that actual PPTN project is?
Yeah, we see that as one of the struggles, one of the primary struggles of this whole thing. Yeah, again, timing being one. The second one being, how do you boil this all down? So we're leaving the door open here on this topic. We think we're going to have to handle this on a case-by-case basis. As an initial assumption, the capacity expansion may assume that the projects all meet the minimum target. It may not be able to consider how the various options go above and beyond that minimum target. But, we say that, again, with some uncertainty there. If we looked across the suite of the proposals and we see that all of the proposals went well above the minimum requirement that was asked of them, we may decide, well, instead of feeding the model the minimum target that the developers were given, maybe we do feed them something else. Maybe we feed them an average, or we look across the 5 proposals and we say, out of all 5 of them, they all achieved at least this amount, and that's what we give the model. But we think we're going to have to handle that based on what we see when we get those results.
I appreciate the conundrum you have there. My only concern with what you just said is, from a timing perspective, I'm not sure in that gap between stage 1 and stage 2 that there is going to be both the commission taking action on the PPTN, the NISO doing the solicitation, and the projects being submitted for you to have all of that information by stage 5. Just putting it out there as a concern.
Yes, we share that concern.
Okay, thank you, Liz.
So,
Thanks.
Sure. I think Erin Hogan had her hand up.
yeah, and I have a number of questions, so I'll just start building upon some of the things Kevin had highlighted. And perhaps, well, this timeline is helpful. Could you go to the next slide? And it gets down to, there's the timing of the PPTN that Kevin described, but there's also the premise that you're making a judgment call by expanding the pipe capacity, that PPTN is going to be better than locating resources closer to load. And I've expressed concerns about this on like the statewide perspective, and then there's the locality perspective as well, or area or zone. So for example, by making the judgment call here in the resource expansion model, there's a cost. So you folks will have to account for that cost in terms of assessing the benefits of any expansion after those pipelines are expanded. But I didn't hear you mention anything like that. Did I miss something?
Yeah, I'll try to clarify. So in stage 1, we're when you think about the benefit cost balance, what we're doing in stage 1 is trying to understand the benefits. But we don't view ourselves as able to fully understand the cost piece at stage 1. So in stage 1, we'll just relax these interfaces. We'll understand what the benefit of relaxing those interfaces might be. And then we will give the commission that information, is that here appears to be a benefit associated with increasing transmission capability across the bulk system. Now, the commission then has to make that decision of whether or not to proceed with the PPTN. So we imagine that they would be asking questions, maybe to the utilities, maybe to independent providers, maybe to the ISO, about what that cost piece might look like. Ask people to pick a number out of the air. But at this point, the utilities are not in a position to provide feedback on what cost might be, and that's not what we intend to do. To the extent that the commission then can make a decision that there might be something there, the commission would have to decide that they want basically more information. So that's what the PPTN would really be doing, is going out to the market and saying, we have a potential need for more transmission capability across the bulk system. We would like developers to provide projects that could fulfill this need. And that's where the cost piece of this would come from. So when we move into stage 5, the output from the NISO solicitation, right? They've made it through viability and sufficiency review. The NISO would be able to inform the commission how the viability and sufficiency review unfolded, what projects were viable and sufficient, and we do view the potential need for a tariff change at the NISO, because what we view the need here is for the NISO to also provide some information on developer costs. So that's where the cost piece of those potential bulk projects would come from. So there again, we have from stage one, we have the potential benefits, and from the PPTN, we have the potential cost. And then in stage 5, the model would be able to help us understand if the cost, if those benefits were worth that cost.
So then it would be essentially a preliminary PPTN, and leaving the timing issues aside, if it's not cost effective, we can just pull the PPTN process and stop it.
Well, that is a commission decision. So I don't view it as preliminary. I think that the NISO process would hold. And what I mean by that is if a developer submits a project, the NISO could select that project and the developer would have to develop that project at whatever cost they agreed to, right? So, you know, there used to be more of a pause point in the NISO's public policy transmission project, or transmission process. I think that that pause point is no longer there, but the commission can step in after the viability and sufficiency review and still make a decision to halt the process. So what we will do here in CGPP is give the commission information that would help them decide if they should halt the process at the NISO. And if the commission decides not to halt the process, the NISO would move forward. Again, per their existing process, the NISO would move forward and select a project.
So I'm going to continue to be concerned that we could potentially be paying for more than what we need. But, you know, otherwise, and I'm not going deliberate because honestly, you'll be stuck repeating yourself going through these steps. I understand, and thank you for the explanation. What you're filing at the end of December, is my understanding, is how the process will proceed, not an actual plan, at least at this juncture. I'm going to ask that this process that's being filed at the end of the year provide the level of detail that parties will be able to have to weigh in on these specifics. And a background on the current timeline, not just the graphic that you provided, but some written explanation of the interactions will be essential, so that people understand the timing of when the PPTN costs generally are provided. And the record for this case is complete, so people have the opportunity to comment.
Yes, thank you for that feedback.
It's Liz. I'm going to jump in. I have a couple of questions in the chat I want to put out there. One is, you know, what's the who sits on the EPAC, from someone who very graciously admits that she missed the discussion. So can you just do a quick overview of the proposal for EPAC as it stands?
I can try. So the proposal for EPAC is that this will be a focused stakeholder group. So it would kind of be representative of the various interests across New York State. For example, NYSERDA, the public service, or NYSERDA, DPS, the utilities would be here, but also entities that represent, for example, renewable developers would be sitting at the EPAC. And the idea here is that this is a kind of a technical advisory board that would provide direction on the the many technical aspects of how these studies will proceed. For example, assumptions that feed into the capacity expansion model, how we will employ or how we will select the scenarios that come out of all of the possible capacity expansion model, or all of the various capacity expansion models that we run. How do we boil that down to a select few for further analysis? So EPAC will be that kind of guiding force to help us have these discussions to move the process ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. I also have kind of another throwback question. I know we did talk about the capacity expansion model in one of the earlier tech conferences, but if you have this information, the question is, how does that model account for DER growth forecast and distribution grid investment?
Yep. So the capacity expansion model. Yeah, you could spend hours talking about all the details here for the capacity expansion model. There was a previous tech conference on this. I would encourage, if you have questions, you want to understand it better, that may be worth a watch. It's also quite a great explanation of how the NISO did capacity expansion model in their recent system and resource outlook. That would be a great resource on capacity expansion modeling. To try to maybe directly answer the question here, I think the way we're intending to, or the way that the DER has been dealt with in like the work that the NISO has done thus far in capacity expansion modeling, it was an assumed input. So what we mean by that is, for example, the 10 gigawatt state goal, that was baked into the model that we would achieve that 10 gigawatt goal by 2030. And a forecast was developed for how those gigawatts, how all that DER would be spread across New York State. So that was part of the forecasting that was done and fed into the model. Now, as part of CGPP, we are going to take a look at the DER assumptions, and to the extent during our, maybe I'll just go back to one of the other graphics here briefly. Sorry for flipping around. So here in these local assessments, that's kind of in the middle of the process, we would consider how that DER would be impacting our transmission and distribution systems within the bubbles, right? So within the zones, within the NICA zones, you know, for example, maybe we assume 1,000 megawatts of DER would be located. We would take a look at and try to understand, can this local zone facilitate that DER, and how would we, or whether or not that, you know, transmission or distribution upgrades might be necessary to facilitate that. So that would be done as part of the local assessment.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Rodika Donaldson, you have your hand up. What's your question?
Hi, hi everyone. First, thank you for the presentation and for looking at this area of bulk integration, because it was a question from all along. So it's great to see the process improvements proposed here. I do have maybe a few questions on the bubble model and the benefits. Do you like, how would you define benefits, and would you make a judgment on how large those benefits need to be, or what are your thoughts on what you need to see, or how would that be developed in regards to what the benefits should look like for that consideration of a public policy need to happen?
So the capacity expansion model is really an optimization model, and the goal that it's optimizing on is really least cost. And that least cost could be, you know, I think with the way that the NISO looked at it, it was really least cost of the generation that needed to be built. But what we're trying to do here in the later stages of CGPP is fold in transmission or distribution investment into that. So to the extent that transmission investment could facilitate a lower cost of generation. I think that would be the main metric that we would be considering. Now we understand that there's potentially many other reasons why transmission may be a good investment. Beyond just least cost, there may be qualitative reasons. There are, for example, many things that the NISO considers when it reviews a PPTN and tries to select a project. Operability, expandability. They have quite a list of things that they consider. But really here, the least cost planning step, the capacity expansion model, is really an optimization based on cost.
So while that was taken out,
You need, somebody needs to mute.
To issue an order pursuant to SAPA, and if they thought that the need.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And one other question related to that. So with this metric a little more clear now, so EPAC maybe makes a proposal or a consideration to the commission. So would the expectation be that the commission will be well informed of this as a process, and going back to the timeline, will there be some timelines associated with making a decision, and does it have to be within the cycle, New York PPTN cycle, or is this a separate?
I think I see where you're going, and I'm happy to tell you, what we'd like to see, and what we're hoping you and others can help us, to put in place here. Yeah, the timing is a difficult problem, and we have a tariff, we have a set of rules in the tariff, and we have a set of commission rules, and we have to make all these things kind of work together. And I don't know. Again, the utilities have said their proposal isn't final, so they may still be working on the timing and the coordination. We may see more details in their proposal, but this is a really key aspect, how we make these things work together. And our aim is to get in front of the commission a full view of the system needs in a timely way. And that's really the overarching objective. So we are not exactly sure what is the best way to line these things up, and what might need to change, or what flexibility might we need to create in existing processes to make this stuff work together in a timely and predictable manner. So if people have ideas about kind of how the process steps should work to accomplish the objective, we're very, very interested in that feedback in the comments.
Thank you, Liz.
Sure. I still have a couple more chat questions for you, Jeff. How does the process address potential intrazonal bulk expansion? Can you address that one?
Yeah, so the way we've envisioned this is that CGPP would kind of, again, have this almost off-ramp to a PPTN. So to the extent that we see a bulk need within the capacity expansion model, we will take that and hand that to the commission to consider the PPTN. When we look kind of more within the zone, on systems that don't facilitate transfer of power across the state, right? So really where I'm trying to make the distinction here is the capacity expansion model, we think, will do a great job understanding how power will shift between, Western New York and Central New York, or from upstate to downstate, right? The capacity expansion model will do a great job showing how power flows across, big chunks of New York State. When we get more locally, we're not envisioning that would happen through a PPTN. Right now, we're envisioning that local needs would be addressed by the utilities. So sometimes those local needs may be addressed by local transmission or local distribution or local higher voltage transmission. So whether you call that bulk transmission, people kind of have different definitions in their minds, but we view that the process here through CGPP, where we do these local assessments and we review these solutions, the incentive here is to develop the least cost solution, because you want your solution to be picked in the least cost planning assessment, right? So if you come up with a project that's very expensive, it won't get picked. So there's a lot of cost pressure here to understand what the most effective or efficient way is to address these local needs. And whether, again, that's distribution or transmission or higher voltage, aka bulk transmission, whatever that least cost solution would be, that's what we would be developing in terms of local solutions.
Thanks for that, Jeff. I don't think I have anything else in the chat right now. Is there anyone on the phone with a question?
This is Yachilin from New York ISO.
Oh, hi, Chi.
If I may, I would like to provide a couple more of clarification. First of all, we would like to thank the joint utility. The proposal of the coordinated grid planning process is a very challenging topic, and we are very grateful that we're invited to review and provide comments. And we've seen that the JU has consistently working through this challenge and really appreciate it. So the first clarification is, I think it's in the bottom of slide 7, where at the stage 1, NISO will be providing, right, thank you. So at the bottom, so when we first started stage 1, over here, if a public policy transmission need is indeed identified by the PSC, New York ISO will kick off our side of the process to solicit the solution and then go on with viability and sufficiency. Jeff did a great job at describing and how this process would incorporate. And then in slide 8, you will see that the stage 5 is where we compare the cost. As of today, the NISO's public policy transmission planning process, there is actually a relatively low visibility on developers' cost estimate. We felt that providing and promoting the transparency in the project design, which we have already done, but as well as the project cost, could assist this overall purpose to achieve the least cost planning. So in 2023, the NISO will pursue, first of all, NISO will pursue a corporate project to identify what are the resources needed to work with the state entities and also the joint utilities for this entire CGPP. And the second part is that NISO will start working with stakeholders on discussing the language to help promote this cost transparency. So if there are also NISO stakeholders listening into here, so just want to give you a heads up, this is what we plan to do. I think.
Thanks,
Yes,
that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
When do you think that discussion with stakeholders, is that something you're saying would be for 2023?
For the corporate project overall on the CGPP, just on what kind of resources, what is the scope, we will definitely kick off in Q1. There's no doubt about it. So in terms of the tariff revision, so first of all, we kick off the entire project and then list out the components that we need to pursue, prioritize with stakeholders. And if this is a fairly limited scope change, so we do hope to at least get it underway and have a good understanding in Q2.
Okay.
But of course, if there's a specific time that, DPS, joint utilities who would like to have, we would like to hear that now, we'll do our best to accommodate.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. That's helpful.
Thank you.
I thought maybe Aaron Hogan, did you have a follow-on question? Yes. Go ahead. Aaron, are you muted?
Yes, apologies. Chief, thank you for bringing up the work that you folks will be exploring in next year in Q1 2023, I think you said. But I'm thinking of the timing, Liz, a little bit too. Our comments now are due on March 1st. And if the ISO is working on their tariff languages, now that I'm verbalizing it, I think that probably could dovetail into a way the commission could take these comments under consideration, make a decision, and then they can proceed the subsequent year in 2024.
Do you mean the NISO could proceed in 2024?
No, because, and maybe, you know, I just have too many things on my plate, but it's my understanding what the commission is going to be deciding on is not an actual plan based in March. Our comments are not on an actual plan, but rather a more detailed planning process that the utilities will be filing at the end of the year.
Oh, yes.
And correct. And so the ISO will be working on things a bit when it's not completely nailed down with the commission's decision.
That's right.
And I'm just thinking, yep, so we have the timing of the commission's decision. We have comments now due, I think you said March 1st. And just thinking out loud, I think it seems reasonable that they should be able to get the tariff language in on time.
I think
Sorry.
that might remain to be, I mean, I'm not, I can only say from our perspective, we would really like the utilities to start the first cycle of CGPP in 2023.
If I may clarify, the tariff revision is not in any way should impede the process of CGPP.
No.
The tariff revision really is aimed to provide that cost transparency in the beginning of stage 5. So that would, and stage 5 is really in the second part of the second year. So I think whatever the commissioner decides, then we can work on the timeline. But I want to clarify, NISO part of the tariff revision should not be an obstacle to the timeline.
Right. So it sounds like that could be in place in time to contribute to the decision making at stage 5.
So Jeff, could you go to, I think it is your slide 5 or no, slide 6. And in that slide, the PPTN tariff language that you referred to is the disclosure of, or the transparency of cost, or was there some other tariff language that you were referring to when you spoke to the slide?
Yeah, I think the true transparency that we would need would be cost. Yeah.
And there's no other tariff language that you think we might need. That's the thing that I'm just trying to double check with this overall timing of things.
I think we also, need to understand that a project is viable and sufficient and achieves the, the goal of the PPTN, but I think the NISO already does a fantastic job doing that. So I think the only thing we're missing is cost.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying and confirming.
Okay. Any other questions for wait, I have something in the chat, it looks like. Question about solutions. Again, Jeff, it's a tiny bit off topic and something I think we did talk about in the tech conference on solutions, but the question is, will reliability analysis be performed prior to production cost simulation for identification of the least cost solution?
So the work that we're going to do for the least cost planning is essentially just capacity expansion modeling. the work that we're going to do to develop the solutions, the potential solutions that will feed into that least cost planning step would be primarily done in power flow analysis.
Okay. And the questioner says, thank you. So you nailed it. Any other questions live from the listeners?
Hi, Jeff. I have a question. Joe Rosenberg for PowerGen, for ConnectGen, excuse me. So, Jeff, I recall from one of the slides that discussed in the January filing, the joint utility submitting some upgrades or proposed upgrades, and I just wanted to understand sort of how that would play in, those upgrades play into the rest of the 2-year planning cycle, whether it would whether you'd be looking at needs that are residual to those solutions, or just trying to understand how a cycle where you'd be dropping solutions in the front end and how that would work.
Yeah, so the utilities are actually preparing 2 filings for December or for January 1st. The big filing here that we're talking about today is CGPP. So that'll be one of our filings discussing the proposed process. The other filing the utilities are working on from that same order is a relook at some of the projects the utilities had proposed in the past. So that would be handled separately via, again, a separate filing, though probably made in a very similar time frame, maybe the same day. So what we're going to do is the way we envision CGPP unfolding is that there would be a pause between cycles. So after the first cycle completes, we will make recommendations to the Public Service Commission for their consideration. We will then give them time to consider those recommendations and act. Again, how they act is up to them. You know, they could authorize projects to proceed, tell us not to proceed with projects, offer refinements to CGPP, whatever it is, whatever the commission offers during that pause period, we would then factor into the next cycle of CGPP. So we view on each cycle building on the previous cycle.
Okay, so yeah, so sorry, Liz. So I just take that as meaning that that parallel track filing would not displace any needs that are in the upcoming 2-year cycle. That it would only be poised for the following cycle. Is that what you were saying, Jeff?
Again, it depends on timing. You know, it depends on when we start the first cycle of CGPP. We may already have an order reflecting the commission direction on the other filing that we will make in January. And if we do have a direction from the commission, then we will, you know, take that direction and feed it into our assumptions in the first cycle of CGPP. So it's all a timing question.
And I'll concur that it is certainly possible that the first cycle of CGPP will have inputs from the utilities January phase 2 portfolio filing. Certainly in the realm of the possible. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yes, thank you, Liz.
Sure. Okay. Anybody else? All right then.
This is John Rath from New York Jail. Can I ask a question?
Oh, yes. Hi, John. I didn't see you.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. I've heard and seen on the pages the terms like capacity expansion, least cost, integration of resources, resiliency, and things like that. And while I'm not an expert for sure, I'm just wondering where geothermal energy in terms of heating and cooling falls, if any place, in this process, because it will make an impact on all of those things, capacity, cost, etc.
So I think what we're I think where that would factor in is that's an input to the model in the sense that what we feed these capacity expansion models are load forecasts and assume generation availability or resource type availability, I guess maybe I'd say it. So to the extent that geothermal plays a part in impacting our load forecast, that would be factored into the assumptions. To the extent that geothermal generation somehow factors in, the model would be given an opportunity to build that type of resource if it was found to be cost effective. So those things are inputs into these capacity expansion models or outputs of the capacity expansion model that we would then move forward through the process with.
And that, so that load forecast, that's really pre-stage one? Is that?
Yes. Yeah. So in stage one, we're going to gather available information.
Why don't you go back to your slide with the overlapping, there you go, capacity expansion and scenario development and database development. Yep.
So here is, to develop the capacity expansion model, we really need to find information that's out in the world, right? So again, the NISO kind of provided us a great framework for how they did this, and they went out and looked to see what work has already been done out there. As part of their system and resource outlook, they eventually settled on kind of 2 policy cases. And one of those policy cases adapted their internal NISO forecast, sometimes referred to as the Gold Book forecasts. And their other scenario looked at stuff that was coming out of the Climate Action Council. So these kind of 2 different forecasts had 1 million assumptions in them for things like EVs or electrification of heat, DER, all of the things that would impact the load kind of went into those forecasts and were fed into the capacity expansion model in the initial step.
Okay, very good. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure. Yep. And I think on the timeline slide, if I remember it, there's a several-month period, data collection and coordination and determination of the build-out scenarios. So that's an early step in the process, and one where I think the utilities are proposing substantive interactions with stakeholders through EPAC.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And anything else? If not, I'll just repeat what I said earlier, which is we think this is a really important juncture, in making the overall process work, is figuring out the details of this particular integration. And we're very, very happy that the utilities have been working on this, and I think have had some helpful thoughts from the NISO as well along the way. And I think that's what we're seeing here is the result of that process, at least so far. I expect, as Jeff said, this isn't the final proposal. So there may be some additional details in the January filing, but this is an area where staff would really appreciate stakeholders' help in making sure the links between the processes work, and that the results can be so that it can be a timely process from the Commission's point of view. So, please do let us know once the utilities make their filing in January, whether you think there are some, other ways to do this. We're very, very interested in other people's ideas. That said, I think we'll wrap for today, and I'll say thanks again to the utilities and NISO for participating in this tech conference, and all of you for joining us. And we look forward to that filing in January, and moving ahead with coordinated planning for CLCPA in New York. So Oh, thanks from John Borchard. Thank you, John. And thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.